welcome back to another video. Today we'll be learning how to create flowcharts using Mermaid Live Editor. So the goal today is not just only to memorize the syntax, but also to understand how flowcharts represents logic. So by the end of this video, we should know how to create flowcharts, how to choose symbols, how to choose steps, arrows, and plan a flowchart before writing the Mermaid code. Let's get into it. In today's video, we'll be covering flowchart symbols, Mermaid directions, node parts, node shapes, and lastly, the thinking process. What is a flowchart? A flowchart is just a visual representation of a process. So instead of explaining everything in a long paragraph, we use shapes and arrows to show the flow. And this makes the process way easier to understand. So this is an example of a flowchart. In this case, it's just a repairing the lamp process, but a similar flowchart would look pretty much the same like this. And of course, it is very useful for software logic, especially when you code. An application or a website is always a logical thinking of process of how things work. Also, business processes, user actions, and system workflows. So a Mermaid Live Editor is just a online tool for creating diagrams. So basically you have to write your code on one side, and the diagram is automatically generated on the other side. And it works differently with the normal drawing tools. We do not drags or drops shapes. Instead, we use a different coding language for Mermaid to read the code. It's pretty much very similar to a JSON file if you have any experience to that before. And some of the advantages are it is usually faster than drawing manually, easier to edit, good for documentations, and very useful for programmers and students. It's a very simple flowchart that I just made. So every Mermaid Live Editor flowchart usually starts with the word flowchart, and in this case it's TD, meaning that top down. So that basically means that your flowchart runs from top to bottom. And after that, we define the nodes. So you have 3 blocks: start, process, and end. So accordingly, we have 3 nodes: start, process, and end. And then I connect the nodes together with the arrow. So I connect A to B, start to process, and connect B to C. So you notice that each line describes either a node or a connection, which is very handy. So here is a very basic syntax for Mermaid flowchart structure. So obviously we have each different flowchart symbols represents a different purpose. So for example, a process is used to describe actions, which its syntax is this one with the square bracket. A decision symbol is used when there are multiple process and multiple possible paths, either a yes or a no or many other decision making process, which has this syntax as a curly bracket. Next up is the input and output, just basically meaning that to input a name when the user type in, or just output or display something. And lastly, most importantly, this is mostly used for database, is mostly used for coding projects, and it's basically just mean that store data. There are many directions in Mermaid that you can choose from: TD, TB, LR, BT, and RL. Each represents a different orientations. So the direction controls how the diagram is arranged, and for the most common one is obviously TD, because for normal process, because people naturally read from top to bottom. LR is useful when showing systems such as like a website or a server than a database, which is quite handy, and I'll show you an example of how these come to play in the end. Shapes in Mermaid. So these are the common shapes: process, round process, start end, decision, database, and input and output. So as I said, these are the basic syntax, and the node ID is not always shown to the reader, but the Mermaid uses it to connect the nodes. And the label here is what appears inside the shape, and the bracket decide the shape of the node, and the different brackets have a different purpose. Before writing any code, any Mermaid code, we have to ask ourselves, what process am I explaining? Where does it start? Where does it end? What are the main steps? Are there any decisions on what happens for each outcome? And is it easy to follow? So these, I recommend you, these should be best to be handwritten down or just have a rough note somewhere. A very common mistake is just straight up starting to write the code too early and you don't got anything in your mind. So it is very crucial that we, understand the code, the process. If the logic is unclear, then the diagram will turn out to be also unclear. So a good thinking creates a good flowchart. I've created an example of a login page. So login page is very common for applications of coding, and so here I divide things into separate parts: client and server, which is actually a good structure to follow. So for client, I have the login form, dashboard, and login error. And the server, I have the API, which retrieves the data from the front end to validate the input, authenticate the user, and create session. So here's the complete flowchart of a login page. So here I have the start, the user login page. Then user have to enter their email and password. And this is the client applications, a subgraph. And then an input and output. User input their information. So the server retrieve the information using API, and it validate if this input is valid or not. If it's no, that it returns the login error to the user in the front end. And if it's an valid input, then it retrieve from the database if this user has existed. If no, then the user has to create a new account and then re-log into the login page. If yes, then the database will create a user login session, and this session will navigate the user back to the dashboard. So here's the complete flowchart that I just made myself, and here's the code for it. So in this case, I use left to right orientation flowchart, and I define all the nodes. Then I create a subgraph of the client, which is this long piece at the bottom here, and then I created another subgraph of the server on the top. That is it for today's tutorial. If you guys got any questions, just drop a comment down below and I'll answer them right away. Stay tuned for more coding tutorials. Let's go, let's code.